things. And all emergency escape routes are clearly signed once you've left the building. The assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Can I please remind members and other speakers to direct your voice towards the microphone when you're speaking. If you do want to stand, if anyone wants to stand, you can lift it or you can move it, you can turn it, but please make sure that your voice is directly into the thing, otherwise it isn't picked up for the YouTube. Okay, so Margaret, do we have any substitutes or apologies, please?
There are no substitutes and no apologies, Chair. Thank you.
Chair, apologies for Councillor Cleary for lateness.
Ah.
He's coming, but the trains are buggered up, so it won't be long.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that Councillor Alcott is also caught up with another engagement, but hopefully we'll come to. Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to the declarations of interest, but first of all, because we've got the Scala project on, I just want to give a bit of a guidance for everybody. This is because that obviously as members we are all involved in various committees where this project has been discussed. And it's where the wider Scala project has been discussed and voted on in terms of declarations of interest would fall outside of the scheme itself and the detail of the scheme, because that hasn't been discussed at committee level. So this means that all members may participate and vote on this item, providing that they don't have a different interest to declare and that they are not predetermined on the matter and come to committee with an open mind, ready to hear all sides of the debate. And of course that stands for Myriad as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Just on the Scala issue, it was discussed at Audit and Governance last night. Clearly we didn't discuss in any way anything to do with the planning application, but just to put on record, we did discuss it.
Yeah, that's right. And Councillor, I must thank you for that, because it's how it has been at various committees along the line, because it is actually a project that's been talked about for a long time, and probably we don't have a single member who hasn't been on a committee where it's been talked about at some stage. But it's only, I think, the leaders who are precluded from planning, because they're the people who signed off the application. Okay, has anyone got any other declaration? Councillor Round.
Yes, thank you, Chair. In respect of item number 8 on the agenda, the Myriad Centre, I was at the last planning committee, but on reflection, I think that I should have declared an interest in that. I have a 20-year-old son with significant learning disabilities and complex needs, but in addition, I'm also the chief officer of a disability charity in Worcester. And I just feel for transparency, that's the best process to take.
Okay, so for that item, are you wanting to leave the room and then come back in for Scala?
No, I think I come to the I know I come to the committee with a clear mind, and I've not prejudged the application.
Okay, lovely. Thank you for confirming that, Councillor Round. Okay, and is there anybody else? No? Okay, so what we'll do then is move on to the minutes of the previous planning committee. And if we go through them page by page, I wasn't in the meeting for the 63 Waterworks Road item, so if people can alert me if anything was wrong on that item. We've got page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9. Okay, so that's a true record of the meeting, and thank you for the people who did the minutes. As usual, 9 pages, that's quite a substantial effort. And we've also got the minutes of the last Conservation Advisory Panel. This is actually the panel that was on the 7th of February, I mean, because we've had one since, I think. But I did, is this correct? Yeah. Yeah, the one that I attended. Yeah, okay, so this is the one that I went to, but I went as a person just watching. I didn't participate. It was a really interesting experience, actually. And of course, in that, there are some comments. Were these some comments on Scala?
Not this one.
No, not this one. No, the High Street Fund, wasn't it? Yeah, yeah. Okay, lovely. We're happy to note those. They're always very interesting to read, aren't they? Someone's perspective on it. We had a really good site visit today for the Scala. I'd really like to thank officers for it. And the architect for the scheme was along, and it was a really informative meeting. We had the opportunity to ask lots of questions about the particular uses of different spaces and what was happening. So I think it was a really good visit. And of course, all members had the opportunity to go to the Myriad last week, or last month as well. So both items have had a site visit. Thank you. Margaret, do we have any public participation or representation, please?
There's no public participation, Chair, but we do have public representation on agenda item 9, which is the former Scala Theatre. And we have the architect speaking on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so should we move on to item 8 then, the Myriad Centre? Thank you. It's presented by Paul.
Thank you, Chair. We'll just get the PowerPoint loaded. Thank you, members, and good afternoon. So this is the application that was represented this month following the deferral from last month's committee for further details upon the cycle provision. So just in terms of completeness, I will go through the presentation again, but probably do it a little briefer just so that we've got the whole context so that it can set the scene for the context for the debate. So you'll remember that the Myriad Centre is located between Henry Street and George Street within the Barbourne area of Worcester. That sort of sets the context of the building from an aerial photo point of view, and you'll remember that it's just south of the Barbourne Brook, which runs across the site. So the building has some age, and it's shown on the 1923 aerial photo, so we'll get to that in a moment. That's the current aerial photo looking from Henry Street, and that's the one looking at St George's Walk. Some pictures of the site just as a refresher, and some pictures of the internal spaces. And that's the 1923 aerial photo, which is quite interesting because you can see the building in situ. That's the existing situation of the street scene. So members will remember that the Myriad Centre is a charitable organisation which provides specialist respite daycare for people with profound mental and learning difficulties. And at the moment they support approximately 16 young adults who are among the most disadvantaged and disabled within the community. The proposal we've got is for the redevelopment of the site to create an approximately additional 163 square metres in terms of increase over above the existing situation. The development is acceptable in policy terms, allowing for the charity to provide care in a suitable purpose-built environment to alleviate concerns with the existing building. The proposed building would consist of a 2-storey and a single-storey element, allowing the design to respect the scale of the surrounding buildings and reduce the perception of massing. The first floor areas contain a greater proportion of glazing to lighten the visual appearance, provide a maximum amount of daylight. Just a 3D visual concept drawing, which is really quite helpful because it just highlights the entrance features and making sure that the entrance is legible and how that would address this street scene. There are some individual elements within the design which break up the monotony of the elevations, and the brickwork, relief brickwork is used, and detailing across the proposal, which again adds to the overall quality of the design which is being proposed. Overall, it's considered that the visual appearance and design, taken in its own right and also within the context of the surrounding area, is a suitable replacement for the building. In terms of the layout, there is a rationalisation of the existing space. So that's the existing space, and that is the proposed space, utilising the elements of the site that they have. The external space is relocated to the west, where the existing, where the area is constrained. So if we just look at, that's the proposed area, which is towards the front now, which is exactly the same in terms of the usable space, and it has more daylight and sunlight and provided in a better location. So in terms of residential amenity, the proposals have been fully considered to ensure that there are adequate separation distances and there's no overbearing impact of the design on neighbouring properties. And you can see that in terms of the window orientation, it's been designed so that there is no direct overlooking or loss of privacy to existing residents. One of the main aspects of concern was that in terms of highway access and parking. And members will note that concerns have been raised and were raised verbally at the meeting last month in respect to the proposed parking arrangements, as the 2 existing off-street spaces for 1 car and 1 minibus will be removed. It is appreciated that the number of clients and staff will increase. However, as set out within and detailed within the report, the applicants have provided additional information in respect of the working of the centre, along with the staff travel information and the proposed sustainable measures that will be put in place. The existing lay-by, which is highlighted there, will be realigned. Further clarification was required at the last meeting over the size, position and circulation space of the cycle store. Following discussions with the applicant and the Highway Authority, the cycle store has been revised to show 6 spaces that are now fully accessible. And you can see that the difference between the proposed, as you saw last month on the bottom of the slide, and at the top of the slide is now what's being proposed, following a reworking and assessment of the space that is provided. The 6 accessible covered secure cycle spaces will provide in a format that now is acceptable to the Highway Authority, and it has been demonstrated that this is now usable in all respects. Further details of the canopy are required to be ensured the cycle racks are not impinged, and there was still some concerns that the cycle stands, the uprights to support any ground-based stands would impinge upon those cycle racks. So an updated condition 10 is before members within the late papers. The Highway Authority are now satisfied that the proposal will not result in any displacement or increase in the parking demand, or would cause any severe highway impact within the locality. Just to reiterate in terms of flood risk and sustainability. So in terms of sustainability, the provision of a new building will provide less reliance on non-sustainable sources and energy requirements. And the approach into the design results in a CO2 reduction that is 23% above the requirements under building regulations, and the proposed PV panels provide 66% of the total energy requirements of the building. And in that respect, the policy requirements within the local plan have been exceeded. The site is at risk of flooding, along with the properties within the locality, and a detailed site flood risk assessment has been conducted. There have been a number of alternative locations, and you'll see within the report that that has been updated based upon the existing location of the Myriad Centre, where they are located at present, and that has been updated to include that site. The conclusion of that process is that there are no other alternative available sites that would meet the needs of the centre outside of this proposed application site. Sustainable drainage is included within the site, which actually will provide a betterment on the overall surface water flooding issues that happen within the site, and also to reduce the amount of flood risk around the surrounding areas. As members considered last time, there are a number of material considerations that need to be weighed up as part of the planning balance. There are elements that are not perfect, but have been found to be acceptable, or that have been fully addressed by the applicant, bringing them in line with the policy requirements. There are other elements that exceed the policy requirements, bringing substantial betterment over the existing situation. It is considered by officers that the social and economic benefits cannot be underestimated, in particular the benefits to the well-designed, purpose-built facility for the users of that facility. Taking all matters into consideration and conducting the planning balance, the recommendation for officers is for approval subject to conditions as set out listed within the report and the updated conditions within the late papers. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Now, Councillor Bissett, would you like to come forward? So Councillor Bissett called in the application and is coming to speak.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all present for giving me the chance to speak on this planning application. I'm one of the City Councillors for St Stephen, which is the ward where that contains the site. The Myriad Centre carries out an important role in providing specialist respite daycare for people with profound mental and learning disabilities and their families. That is beyond dispute. I value very much what they do, and I want to see it continue in our city. I also agree with them that their current buildings leave much to be desired, and that it's a good thing for facilities like this to be in areas where normal areas where residential, where people live, and rather than being shut away somewhere where they're not seen. I think that's really important. But all the same, I do think that this planning application to demolish the existing premises and build new ones should be rejected. I know many of the residents of the area, part of my ward, are firmly opposed to the development, while also being grateful that the centre exists, providing its services. My reasons for being in favour of rejection are parking and highways issues and overdevelopment. So first of all, on parking and highways, there have been parking issues at the Myriad site for years. St George's Walk is a one-way street with parking allowed on the right-hand side, going south only. The road is used as a cut-through for drivers wanting to avoid Barbourne Road. Henry Street on the other side of the site is narrow and often has cars parked on both sides of the pavement, If this application is approved, the parking situation will get even worse, since the 2 spaces on the site will be lost and there will be more clients and staff. Because St George's Walk is a one-way street, front seat passengers arriving at the site have to alight onto the road, a clear road safety issue. Drop-off and pick-up times at Myriad often do coincide with drop-off and pick-up times at nearby schools. So far, the local residents of the Myriad Centre have managed relations with a combination of goodwill and compromise. This working relationship is threatened. The new larger premises will allow the centre to expand its provision from 16 to 20, with an associated increase in the number of staff, so pressure on parking will increase. Already, approximately 12 vehicles park on surrounding roads every day, associated with the site. I note that County Highways recommended the application for refusal twice before changing their minds and withdrawing their objections. I find their original comments very convincing, and I do not understand why they have changed their minds. They say in section 614, additional information to support their proposal to include measures to mitigate for the loss of parking, and whilst the proposed development will result in an element of displacement parking on the highway, this cannot be said to represent a severe impact on the transport network. The centre says these measures might include, for example, car sharing scheme, off-site parking rental, travel plan to increase uptake in sustainable transport options, I have limited faith that these measures, if implemented, will negate the extra pressure on parking and the local road network caused by this development. And then on overdevelopment and where it is. The new buildings will take up every inch of the site. The amenity space is small, it's not very green, the surface is paved, the limited planting is in containers, it has no view. I agree with the comments of local residents that this residential area is the wrong place for a centre such as the Myriad, simply because it's a congested area, not because it's residential. As I said, I think residential is fine. I'm grateful to the centre for their protracted efforts to find suitable premises elsewhere in the city. I still find it hard to believe that there is no other suitable site. I wish the Myriad Centre well for its future in Worcester. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bissett. Does anyone have any questions for Councillor Amos?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bissett, you made an interesting point on the parking issue, and that when the minibuses come, people have got to get into and out of the minibuses, and obviously you need to do that in a safe space. Are you saying that your concern is that people getting in and out of the minibuses are going to have to do that in the road?
I believe they would do that at the back of the minibus. I was more thinking about people arriving by car than the minibus arrivals and departures.
Right. So your concern is still that people coming to the building and coming to the facility will have to access their vehicles on the road. They can't do it off-road.
I think sometimes they will, yes, especially if the Myriad vehicles are parked and using those spaces already, and somebody arrives in a car.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Udall.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bissett, I'm looking at the drawing, the pictures in the document pack of the existing building and the proposed new building. Obviously, the existing building has got some historical importance locally. Do you have any concerns about the loss of that existing building and its replacement with a building which may or may not be in keeping with local expectation, with the amount of glazing which is being provided?
That isn't really a concern of mine, no. In fact, if they could replace the existing building by a smaller building that was well designed and sustainable, then and that was serving the same number of people. So in other words, there will be then no further impact on parking. I think that would be acceptable, but of course it would mean that they wouldn't be increasing the number of people that they can help, which would obviously not ideal.
So the design of the building itself, you do not object to. It's the other aspects which are related to the use of the building.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
I've got Councillor Cross, please.
Thank you. Thank you for coming in and raising resident concerns, bringing resident concerns to our attention. Picking up on the second part you mentioned about overdevelopment, I'm keen to understand that aspect of the concern better, whether it's relating to the building within its plot, or whether it's relating to impact upon the neighbouring area. Please let me understand it better. Thank you.
I think it's related to it taking up every inch of the site, so that there's no space for any greenery around it, apart from the tiny bit of greenery that's going to be in the recreation area.
Okay. Yeah, Councillor Bissett, I've just got one question, if that's okay. In the travel plan, it does talk about staff not being able to park on Henry Street. And there was talk at the last committee meeting that we'd have registration numbers and they would be needing to park elsewhere. Does that allay your concerns for the residents on Henry Street, please? Can I come back with a question to you? Can I just make sure I understand this properly? So
the staff would not be allowed to park on Henry Street, and how would this be controlled?
Through you, Chair. In terms of controlling it, this committee has, in previous applications, not on this site but for other sites, imposed a parking management plan, and there has been discussion of how that would be enforced, but this committee has endorsed that in terms of the centre providing that, how that residents would notify the centre of breaches of that parking management plan and how the enforceability of that. And I think with this particular site, it probably is easier to enforce because there is a very clear direct point of contact in which residents can get to. Where we've talked about larger organisations, I did understand councillors' concerns, but notwithstanding that, that was something that we felt was suitable as a planning condition. So it could be something that if councillors wish to impose a parking management plan, that's certainly something that we could look at as part of the conditions, and it would be a suitable aspect to do. So that's the way it would be enforced.
So I think such a parking plan will be welcomed by the people who live in Henry Street, but it is inevitable that the staff will then look further afield for somewhere to park and could well be causing problems elsewhere in the locality.
I've got Councillor Agar, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bissett, I mean, like you, I was concerned last time we saw this application about the constraints of the site and the lack of greenery. So I asked a question, and the answer I got about the amenity of the site, and I don't know if you know about this, were you aware that there is this programme of activity in green spaces that means that the clients actually get out into Gellyvelt Park on a very regular basis, and also I think fortnightly to access to much larger green spaces as well. Does that give you any feeling that it's not too difficult a question?
I'm very glad that they get out to Gellyvelt Park and to other places, but I think we all need greenery around us, throughout the day, not just occasionally, where we are, indoors. It's nice to see greenery and not to have the entire site developed.
Councillor Cross?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, on page 17, paragraph 6.20, there is mention of the parking management strategy amongst the stated previously recommended conditions. So hopefully we can address that, and it's a very clear identifiable site. And I'm just trying to remember, was it 50% of staff? So the centre advised that 50% of their staff, only 50% drive. So it's less than with some other developments locally. So in terms of numbers of staff or proportion of staff who actually do drive currently. Thank you.
I'm not quite sure what you're asking me.
Oh, more of a point to me about the the parking management plan. So that hopefully we have that being addressed. So it's kind of a reassurance thing. And the second one was also tying into that about the 50% as opposed to 80% of staff who are driving.
So you're making a point rather than asking a question?
Okay, fine.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I've got Councillor Amos and Councillor Round. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, maybe I'm going deaf. It's a sign of youth. Can I just get clear, Councillor Bishop, when in response to Mr. Round's point about a traffic management plan, you were satisfied. I only ask that because my experience of these things, they never work. They're never enforced, and that's why they don't work, because who's going to enforce them? They don't enforce them. It seems to me you're being very generous if you're believing that the staff at the centre are going to police parking, which is one of the most sensitive, argumentative issues you could ever get involved with. So do you really believe that this traffic management system or scheme, or whatever it's called, is actually going to work?
I think it might help, but I think on a scale of, well, I won't go into scales. I don't think it's enough to ameliorate the parking situation.
Councillor Round.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Councillor Bissis, your knowledge of the local area, there are, on St George's Walk, the Myriad Centre has the parking for their minibuses, which are disabled allocated. So are nearby residents prevented from being able to park in the disabled car parking spaces because the Myriad Centre keeps their minibuses there generally all day, unless they're going on trips, is what we ascertained at the last meeting. So I want to know, has anybody been prevented locally from using the disabled car parking spaces?
Anecdotally, yes. I couldn't possibly say how often or how many or who, but I do know that in the 5 years I've been a St Stephen councillor, I have had residents complain that there are these 2 disabled parking spaces, but nobody else can use them apart from Myriad, because the Myriad vehicles are there practically all day.
Councillor Udall.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask you, Councillor Bissett, about Councillor Cross's comments when you indicated that only a small percentage of people currently who are employed at the centre actually travel to work by car. Would you agree with me, perhaps, that future car use of employees and visitors cannot be based on its current use of visitors and employees coming by car? So future use may be different to what it is at the moment, and we can't rely on its current numbers based on the projection for the future.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Do I have any other further questions to Councillor Bissett? No? Okay, well, thank you very much for your coming to speak, and I think it's, you know, great as a local council that you've done that and represented your residents. Of course you can, yes. Shall we move to questions for officers, please? Councillor Amos. Let's go ahead, yes.
Over to Mr. Round, if I may. As he was half expecting, that's why I was looking the other way. Just one thing that hasn't come up, and perhaps I'm the only one, member of the committee is concerned. It's about the flooding thing. Sorry, just bear with me a second. I've got, there's too many papers here. Right, 7.63. Yes. On the flooding, it says only where there are no reasonably available sites in flood zones 1 and 2 should the suitability of sites in flood zone 3, which are defined as areas with a high probability of river or sea flooding, high probability, be considered. So can Mr. Round just give us a bit more detail why he seems to be taking no notice of that and is actually nonetheless still recommending approval, given that we are in now a period of unprecedented climate change? So whatever the situation was in the past, to inform us now, we know the situation is going to be more unpredictable, and one of the unpredictabilities is the amount of heavy sudden rain and flooding we're getting. So I would be extremely concerned that this committee would give permission for something in zone flood zone 3 unless there are exceptional circumstances. But what are the exceptional circumstances? That's my first question, Chair.
Through you, Chair, and Councillor Amos, thank you for your question, as always. In terms of the flooding elements, members will see from paragraph 7.65 downwards, quite a detailed analysis has been done. You'll notice that the council, the officers have gone down the route which is set out within the NPPF in terms of looking at, is there an alternative available site? And we have confirmed and gone through each one of the suggested sites and ensured that there isn't an alternative. But that's not enough. And as Councillor Amos quite rightly says, that's not enough. Exceptional circumstances need to be demonstrated. And you'll see from paragraph 7.79 downwards that officers have done the exception test, and helped by the Environment Agency and also the South Worcestershire Drainage Partnership. In terms of the exception test, we have a building that's there at the moment. And yes, this would be a new build, but what the opportunity does in terms of the new build is actually takes account of climate change. So we can actually make this building more flood resilient. So we have a building there that's at the moment. The options are they could extend it, but actually that wouldn't provide us the opportunity to make it more flood resilient, and it wouldn't give us the opportunity to be able to put in sustainable urban drainage, which would reduce the flood risk elsewhere. So what officers have balanced is that exceptional test in the basis that there is a building there, so that's one element. Secondly, that this new build would enhance the flood resilience for the centre and its vulnerable users, but also it takes the opportunity to reduce flood risk elsewhere, so actually it's betterment for the overall area. So on those elements, we have gone through the process and we have judged that there are exceptional circumstances to allow development in this site.
Thank you, Chair. So is, just to clarify, then, is Mr. Round saying that because there is already a building there that floods, it's okay to put another building there that's going to flood?
Through you, Chair, I'm happy to clarify that, but that's not what I said. What I said was that there are three aspects. Firstly, that there is a building there. Secondly, that it enables for more flood resilient building to be provided, which safeguards users, but also it reduces the amount of surface water and flooding elsewhere. So there are more than just the building is there. There are other elements to the exception test which has been set out within the report.
Thank you. If I may, I'll move on to my second question. Obviously, that'll be a matter for the centre, if they get permission, to talk to their insurers about whether they're happy to insure a building that's going to be flooded. But that's not a matter for this committee, obviously. It does come actually, Chair, to the question of parking, because this is a pretty difficult situation. Highways started off with a very robust response, and I'm obviously directing my highways comments to Mr. Round today, but it started in January. I just want to highlight some of the points, Chair, because they are very, very clear comments. Highway said initially in January, existing parking will be replaced by the garden area, which is not acceptable. Spaces are at a premium, side roads, vicinity of the site, majority of dwellings don't benefit from in-curtilage parking. Displacement of further vehicles onto the carriageway will exacerbate existing parking pressures, increase the risk of conflict with other road users, and that's the point I was making with Councillor Bissett, the conflict over these spaces, which nobody will want to intervene and resolve. So that was the response in January. Again, in March, without going over that lot, but in essence, Highways repeated those concerns. Increasing parking demand, displacement of existing, exacerbate the existing parking issue, displacement parking represents a highway safety hazard. And then, as Councillor Bissett pointed out, all of a sudden, in August, the Highways response was no objection. So I thought, well, what's happened in the interim? I can tell you what's happened in the interim. The applicant has submitted additional information. So what I would like to drill down on, and I do in like some detail on this, Chair, if I may, what this additional information is, because Highways still say that even with that, it will result in an element of displacement. And then it introduces a new element, which is what bothers me. This is why I wanted to come on to this. In order to support their case of no objections, Highways then introduce a new element, which is, together with a lack of personal injury accident data in this location, but that lack of personal injury accident data in this location was also available when they submitted their objections in January, and that information was also available when they submitted their objections in March. So I don't know why they've introduced that as an element now to have no objections when it was part of their objections in the first place, because that lack of data, frankly, is irrelevant because it wasn't a problem in the first place. It becomes not a problem in the Anyway, Chair, so that's what I want to drill down on. And the final question, which is a separate issue, I know, is the question of overdevelopment. According to Councillor Bisson, what I've read from the report and seen on the plans, literally, there is no space, there is no margin of error whatsoever. Now, do we really want buildings which make it impossible to have any greenery, any aspect, any green aspect at all, because they're using every single inch? So they're my final two questions, Chair. But I would just like to take up Mr. Round on the question of the traffic management thing, whatever it's called, earlier, because I think it wasn't that long ago. I'm trying to remember the case. Mr. Round may remember better than I. We had one of these things somewhere else, and it was basically asking, to put an analogy, Chair, the police to investigate complaints against the police, and who would trust that? I wouldn't. So enforcing this is the problem. If it worked, I would go along with you. But because nobody's, who on earth, somebody running a care home, is going to go out and start getting involved with neighbour disputes over parking? It's not going to happen. And therefore, what we're building here is unnecessary conflict with residents. And that concerns me a lot, because somebody is going to have to resolve those conflicts, and I don't know who it's going to be.
Through you, Chair. Again, questions are useful, I think, in terms of the overall debate. In respect to the highway comments, as Councillor Amos has gone through, and it's quite set out within the report, the highways responses from January and March. In August, a travel plan and access and parking management strategy was submitted, which provided the comfort to the Highway Authority in respect of their comments and addressed those concerns that they'd got. In respect of their inclusion of the lack of personal accident data, as far as I understand, that had been taken account of in previous comments, but was just not reported in that element. But what they are saying in their final comments in August is that even though that one of the aspects that they've taken account of is the lack of personal injury, the previous position that they got without the travel plan access parking strategy was that there was no comfort. They now have that comfort, and therefore they could come to a no objection response. So the lack of personal injury is just being explicit in terms of those things that they've considered. In respect of overdevelopment of the site, I'm not sure whether that was a rhetorical question in terms of do we want to approve lack of green spaces with greenery? Well, actually, as planning members of the committee will understand that there is a balance to be struck, and on this site, on this occasion, officers have considered that it's not an overdevelopment. We do consider that there is sufficient outdoor space, but each case is on its merits, and it's a balance to be struck. And then finally, in terms of the enforceability, I believe it was the Listers site that we considered, and as Councillor Amos is aware, that there have been that hasn't been implemented fully yet, so we will see how that runs. But we have had a conversation, haven't we, with head office, and they have said that they are willing to enforce it. So I believe, and as I commented earlier, the fact that we have a very focused charity and they have set out very clearly their aspirations of how they expect their staff to act and behave within local residents, I believe that it is an enforceable condition, and that we will be able to, as enforcement investigations, be able to see whether that is being upheld and enforced. So I do believe it is a condition that can be imposed.
Thank you, Chair. That's very helpful. But could I just press Mr. Round to actually answer the particular point about this? The applicant has submitted additional information which completely reversed the position of highways. I don't know what led highways to come to this conclusion based on the additional information. But if it's provided by the applicant, I would hope there's some kind of verification for what they're saying, because we can take one person's word against another person's word. So what have they said that's convinced Highways, and have the officers validated that? In other words, are they satisfied that what the applicant has said? Because we often have consultants' reports, don't we, paid for by the applicant, and funny enough, the consultants' report comes up with what the applicants want to hear. So you pay for what you get, basically, or you get what you pay for. So can you just clarify that a bit, please?
Absolutely, and through you, Chair, in terms of the report that was submitted, we have the Highway Authority, and as part of that, their officers are technical highway engineers, and so they have validated that report and ensured that it is robust. Otherwise, they wouldn't have offered a no objection response.
Sorry to press this, but what is this information that has changed their mind? Could you put it on a map? I mean, what's happened? What have the applicants said, which goes from a pretty clear refusal to no objection? What is it? Unless I've missed something.
Through you, Chair, I think I did mention it in my comments, so I might have been, might have not, so I apologise. It's the travel plan, the access and parking strategy which was submitted. So it's a document that was provided to the Highway Authority, which they mention within their comments and their conditions, that they feel actually addresses those concerns that they have. So it's a report that sets out how the centre are going to deal with parking, how they're going to deal with their travel plan, how they're going to deal with access arrangements in and around the centre. So that was sufficient to be able to provide a no objection response.
But has that information, through you, Chair, been provided to members of this committee who have got to make the decision? We can't make a decision on the basis of information we haven't got.
Through you, Chair, that has been sat on the planning file since August last year, so it's not a new document that has arrived between the committees, and as the report sets out, members have the ability to be able to see additional reports that surround that, and it is being set out in summary within the officer's report.
Thank you. I've got Councillor De Zero, then Councillor Stanley, please.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to say that I think having this centre is so massively important. I can't imagine what it must be like to need the respite care that this centre will provide. So, you know, I think that's something that weighs quite heavily in the planning balance that we're trying to consider here today. What I wanted to understand, though, I think I heard Councillor Bissett mention off-site parking plan as part of the plan that they've got for the travel. Is that correct?
In terms of the parking management?
Yes.
Yes.
Is any of that applicable to the buses that they're intending to leave outside the centre?
Through you, Chair, I can't answer that specifically in terms of how that's going to be arranged, but as members will have heard from previous answers from the applicant on the last month, they do leave the buses there whilst they're not out and about on trips, or they're not in operation. So the buses will be there in the disabled bay that's allocated for disabled spaces.
Is there an option to make a planning condition that that doesn't happen, so that a little bit more leeway is available?
Through you, Chair, there is a possibility, and it was something, depending on how the debate was going to go, it's to be raised, that there's not a specific condition that talks about that parking management plan. So if members so wished, they could actually dictate that that could be something that's submitted, and as part of the condition would deal with where minibuses would be parked during the day. So that could be something that's added as part of the planning conditions.
Can I just ask, Paul, would that also relate to the buses being parked there at evenings and weekends?
Yes, and it would also deal with the enforcement of staff parking within Stanley Street.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I've got Councillor Stanley, please.
Chair, thanks very much. I think for me, excuse me, notwithstanding all the comments that have been made about the traffic issues, the parking issues, I understand all that. But key word here for me is balance. there are, you know, we're in danger here if we're not very careful, from my perspective, of throwing out the very good in pursuit of the excellent. The word is contained within the minutes of the previous discussion we had at the last meeting. The centre is an adaptation. Yes, it's not purpose-built. It wasn't, you know, we didn't start out with a clean, you know, piece of paper and produce something that would have been perfect, should there be such a thing. The work that is undertaken at this centre, in my view, and I'm sure other colleagues share this, is of such importance that, in my view, the balance that I have taken is that doesn't mean that we just, you know, walk away from the considerations and the concerns about parking and traffic within the area. But it is, for me, overwhelmingly the case that the people who are cared for at this centre are cared for in an environment they know, they understand, that they have the access to facilities that are relatively close to hand, that there are that they feel comfortable with, that doesn't provide them with anxiety levels that perhaps would be something that would be difficult to manage. So whilst it's not a question, there is no question. I think, though, personally, I think the questions were asked last time. We came back to resolve one or two issues. But the key thing to understand from my perspective is that whilst I get the concerns about parking, we have a duty, in my opinion, to consider the incredibly important work that takes place within this centre. So yeah, I'll park that there, but I would be very, very reluctant to lose this on the basis of questions of parking or traffic.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Stanley. I'll build on that a little bit, because I think that's a really interesting point. When we went to the site visit last time, it really struck a lot of us that the standard of the existing building was very poorly suited to its purpose, particularly some of the tight corners, the narrow corridors, the smallness of the rooms, and the disabled access within and outside the building. So obviously that is a planning consideration. And also, I'd just like to clarify with Paul, when we're talking about extra vehicles, I think if I've got it correct, we're talking about a maximum of 16 staff on site. 50% of them drive, so we're talking about 8 cars potentially. Is that correct? So I'm thinking about your balance, and you know, you've got a school next door where you've got potentially hundreds of cars coming to a building, but this one potentially has got 8. Just thought we, you know, let's get some, you're right, it's the perspective. Councillor Udall.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got a number of questions, if I may. Some are simplistic for my own explanations, and others a bit more detailed. I'll ask them one by one. In the last meeting, there was a lot of reference made to the on-street electric charging machines. I can't find reference to that this time. Have I missed it, or have I not read it properly, or can you clarify where that is?
I can, Councillor Udall. That's because at the moment the County Council do not allow on-street charging. There is, I believe, a strategy forthcoming, which Karen talked to us about at the pre-meeting, which we are expecting, I think, in June, which would be extremely welcome to people of the city. So, county colleagues, please push for it and make sure it happens. Thank you.
Well, my view on that is well known. Can I ask about the disabled space which has been referred to for the minibuses and other vehicles? It's an allocated disabled space, but it's actually for public use, not specifically for this venue. Is that correct? So anybody can park in that space. It's not reserved for the minibuses of this centre.
That's correct.
Okay. A lot's been said about the social benefit of this centre. Can I just ask for clarity and for fairness, if this was a small micro business with 16 employees coming in, not a charity, would it still be down for recommendation for approval, or would, because of the nature of the business not being a charity, does that give it any benefit in the weight of member officers' minds and recommending approval? Because if this was a micro business being used for small industrial use or whatever, storage, with 16 employees, would we still be recommending approval?
Through you, Chair, it's a difficult question to have asked, and I don't. It's a little bit of comparing apples and oranges on the basis that the transport modes and the activity to and from the site would be different if it was to be a micro business to what we've got proposed. So it is quite specific in terms of the recommendation based upon the building, its use, its users. So it is quite tailored in terms of the recommendation and the balance based upon this very specific project. I wouldn't be able to comment on whether we would be recommending approval for something else, because there are other aspects that would need to be balanced, perhaps in a different way.
I hear what you're saying, and I'm hearing it's distinctly possible. If this wasn't a charity and it was a micro business employing 16 people, we may not be looking at a recommendation for approval. I'll come back to that maybe later. A big issue of concern for me is the design of the building, and I've mentioned it in my question to Councillor Bissett about the number of glass at the front of the building. To me, it does resemble a bit of an industrial greenhouse. And that does concern me, because we had the last meeting, I asked specifically about ventilation, and there was to be no extra ventilation. Now, I've been into buildings like this. The old former fire station in Malvern was like this, and you could grow tomatoes in it in the winter. It was so hot. And the ventilation was problematic. Bearing in mind the specific nature of the use of this site, which we're talking about, I am concerned about the extensive use of glass in front of the building, and not only on the impact on the individuals who will be using the centre, but also on the appearance of it compared to the other neighbouring properties in the area. Therefore, it's not in keeping with the neighbourhood of the street scene. And can I have some assurances about that? And what can we do to make sure that the glass itself can be maintained easily and is subject to ventilation?
Through you, Chair, I think we had sufficient reassurance last month, but again, it's for members to consider. Officers are satisfied that the answers that have been provided in terms of ventilation, but also there are requirements in terms of the glazing under building regulations, in terms of ventilation and overheating. So in certain respects, I agree. I've been in sites as well that feel like the greenhouse and take your pocket tomatoes along with you. I think building regulations have moved on since those days to a provision that now that has been overcome, and it has to be suitable for the users that are there. In terms of the design, we are satisfied that it does fit in, that it does look yes, it's a more modern design, but actually we do feel that it has the architectural characteristics of the surrounding area to make sure that it adheres to that characteristic.
And my final question, Chair, we are granting it planning consent potentially, based on the recommendation we have in front of us, for its use as described. What conditions can we have, or could we insist upon, or what measures could we take to ensure that any future occupants of this building, if the charity decided to sell and move out and go somewhere else, would not become a problem in the future? For instance, if they did sell to a micro business for a conversion into I don't know what, a double glazing business, what protection have we got to ensure that that does not happen? And that by the fact that we've granted consent here today, we're not laying ourselves open to a future problem with a future use of the building, which is not yet actually known or understood.
Through you, Chair, I think that's a fair point to make, and if members were concerned and balanced it in such a way that it was for this specific use, for this specific type of user, there could be a condition that's imposed to say that it can't be used for anything other than for the specific use applied for. Given the use classes, it would only be for a care facility, but I do appreciate that members may balance this on the basis that this specific care facility might be a different aspects that may bring, to quote you, Councillor Udall, other issues that haven't been considered as part of this. So if members felt that actually in terms of the balance that they're considering, that actually the balance in terms of the users and the social benefits of this specific applicant are such, they could tie that down in terms of an additional condition on the specific use of the site.
Councillor Udall, I agree. When I looked at the elevations, first of all, I thought there was a lot of glass as well. But I really find, and I think if I could draw members' attentions to the 3D images, there's particularly one in the, I think you might have it in the report, I don't know, the design and access statement's got a really nice one, visualisation of the east elevation of the entrance. It shows how there's an overhang over that glazing. It's actually set back. So there will be some shade, I expect, and it shows you that it's not a flat elevation. It's got that kind of differentiation. I think it looks a lot better than looking at the flat elevation.
It's not a flat elevation, but it could be a fishbowl.
Okay, it is double glazing to a circulation space as well, isn't it? It looks like, yeah. Okay, Councillor Cross and then Councillor Round.
Thank you, Chair. We've heard the words overdevelopment have been raised quite a lot at stages in this meeting today. Is there a minimum level of outdoor space provision for this type of building? I mean, if it were a house, we know there would be. Is there for this?
Through you, Chair, no, there's not. And you're correct in terms of residential space. There is a set space within the design SPD, but for this type of unit there isn't, and that's why officers have done that comparison between the existing space that's usable and making sure that there's no net loss to the usable space within within the development.
Thank you. And my final question on page 35, paragraph 8.4, I think there's some text still intended to be added, which would have helped with Councillor Udall's comment about the weight to be afforded to this benefit of what this particular development will apply.
Yes, noted.
Councillor Round.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's been really interesting to hear all members' viewpoints. I was particularly interested to hear Councillor Stanley's views. This provision is, and these types of provision are very, very close to my heart. You know, and I'm all, you know, when we're sitting here today, we're looking at it from a planning point of view. Now, I must admit, I'm flipping all over the place at the moment on this. Is that and in our hearts, we want to support the Myriad because the opportunities that they provide and the respite and the care to their service users is unbelievable, and it's a facility that we don't want to lose in Worcester. We want to support as much as we can. However, I find I'm struggling with a number of issues, and we have to move away from what's in our heart and we have to think about practicalities and look at things from a planning point of view. And from my point of view, how I see it at the moment, I have significant concerns about the car parking issues and highways issues. I'm concerned about the service users and how they're alighting from the minibuses. You know, it's difficult when you have a person with disabilities who's in a wheelchair and is trying to alight from a minibus. It's not a 2-second in, flip and out you go. It's a long and can be quite a difficult process to look after a young person who's got physical disabilities. And if there is traffic building up, it can cause, I believe, quite a bit of stress and anxiety on that service user. Particularly road users are not the most patient people while they're waiting. So that concerns me. I'm really concerned about the open amenity space for the service users. It's tiny, it's inadequate. So I hear and it's great, and with my heart, I'm so passionate about what they do. They do lots of things in the community and they're taking service users to Gulliver Park. That's great, that's wonderful. But I heard every 2 weeks. So I'm just concerned about the service users. It's not a planning issue, but it does fall into a planning issue in terms of the amenity outside space for service users. What are they, you know, are they inside all the time? It's really important that they have access to outdoor space on a, you know, regular basis. It's daily, you know, and they need sensory gardens. You know, taking someone to Gulliver Park infrequently is concerns me, that they should be able to have free and easy access to an outside space. We don't have that here. I'm concerned to see about the flooding aspect concerns me. You know, we've got flooding provision here, prevention in terms of the building itself, but on the outside space, those flooding prevention measures don't cover the roads leading to the centre. So am I correct that they don't? Am I correct in that they don't cover up to the centre itself? So how are the minibuses going to get there when the roads are flooded? You know, and how are they going to leave the building? There's no access there because the roads will be flooded. The centre itself will be fine because they've got the flood prevention measures, but the roads leading to it are not. And in the lack of the disabled space, it's going to be used by the Myriad Centre. So how are the local residents feeling? That just concerns me. I think my main issue at the moment, and I haven't come to a conclusion yet, is the outside space, the lack of the outside space. I think it's a real... I understand why they've had to use every inch of space to get a suitable building for their service users, but the outdoor space is equally as important for these service users as the indoor facilities, and that's what concerns me at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Round. I've got Councillor Agar.
Thank you, Chair. From what you said, Councillor Round, I'm quite concerned that you might have misheard my question at the time. What I was told when I asked about the amenity space, because like you, I was concerned about the very small amount of outdoor space on site, was that they said they pretty much daily took clients across to Gellivelt Park and enjoyed the greenery there, but that fortnightly they also had a programme of trips to outdoor spaces, so that they took clients further afield to all sorts of places, as far as I could tell. I don't know if that helps a bit to know that.
Thank you, it does, and I have misunderstood what you said.
Yes.
But my thoughts still stand that frequent
Understood.
outdoor space is pretty crucial, really is crucial.
Understood. May I actually ask our officers a question at this point? I need to clarify in my mind that I think in all of this, would I be correct in assuming that because there is a building there that is not purpose-built, and we are looking at producing perhaps a purpose-built building with all the benefits that that implies for clients, that there is an implied fallback position in all of this, not just in terms of the building, but also in terms of the parking and so forth?
Through you, Chair. Yes, there is. Obviously, the concerns that have been expressed in terms of the disabled drop-off and provision of minibuses, that exists as those arrangements won't alter. So whilst the lay-by will be realigned, that exists as it stands at the moment. So traffic passes, they are service users will access the building in exactly the same way. The existing provision in terms of open space, and I'll reiterate what I said earlier, in terms of what is provided now, yes, it is small, but it is no net loss in terms of usable space than we have at the moment. So whilst it may be looked at as being small, from an officer's point of view, we are making sure that there is no net loss in terms of that open space. So we have a building that functions, and I think it has been mentioned, doesn't function very well. What the opportunity is for a purpose-built facility which will improve that facility. And yes, I think I said it at the end of my comments and presentation, it's not a perfect application, but it's a balance that needs to be struck in terms of weighing up all the benefits against those harms and members coming up with a conclusion. Officers have concluded that weighing up those benefits outweigh any harms that have been identified, and therefore it can be supported.
So we're saying that, and I think it's very clear that this building is a betterment from what is there now, but also, hang on, I've lost myself slightly. Oh yes, that also because it so clearly is needed, there's such a clear social need that it is very clear how the application fulfills the social objective of the sustainability question. So that's a huge part of the planning balance as I see it. So for me, actually, despite its flaws, and I think I'm clear that it's flawed, that I feel that we probably should say yes to this.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Agar. I mean, one thing that I've noted with the outside space, because it is small, but it isn't worse, and in fact it's better, because it used to be at the back of the building, which is completely shaded, and it's been moved to the front of the building where it's going to be in sunlight. And actually the quality of space, I think, is a betterment, even though it's small. Because I would prefer to be in a sunlit place than one in deep shade. It's going to feel a bit warmer and a bit brighter, isn't it? Though I agree with you, it's small. Who have I got next? Councillor Cross, you want to come back? And then Councillor Amos.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm also struggling between the constraints of the limits of the site and the outside space being small. And I think what's really important, as we just heard, the social benefit of what this site would then provide, and how the charity would then benefit from being able to use this. I would heartily support a condition relating to, if we were minded to grant permission, that it would be tied to this social use of this site and this building, not for wider sort of commercial benefit elsewhere. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, if I may, Chair, just a few comments on the questions at the end, and I'm asking it because listening to the debate, I actually think it's a fundamental question, and it's beginning to bother me how we come to vote. It seems to me that what we've got here, as I understand from my perspective, Chair, is that we've got a building here which is not ugly, but it's not attractive. It's in flood zone 3. There are, however they're defined, going to be parking problems and conflict with neighbours and residents. I believe it is overdevelopment because there's no green space around. It is a charity, but that it's also a private business. And we're told there's no other site within the whole city area that can accommodate that. Frankly, I'm not convinced about that. I don't know the extent to which that search has been done or verified by anybody. Very easy to say that, I'm afraid, Chair. But I would be amazed, looking at Worcester and the environs as I know it, I would be staggered if there is no other site. There may not be, but I'm struggling to believe that. So my fundamental question is this. As Mr. Round said, balance and merits and all that. But in all the planning training we have, we're told whatever decision we make, and it's our judgment, it is balance often, there have got to be planning considerations. And my fear, listening to what colleagues are saying, is that planning considerations in this case are going to be overridden by emotional ones. Now, I'm partly as guilty as anybody else because there's nobody around this table who doesn't think we need this kind of facility. Obviously, that's a given. But then if I vote for that because I think we need a social facility of this nature, then, and it's Councillor Udall's question, if this were a small business development, perhaps employing 16 people to take as example, I would say, great, we need jobs as well. But I'm pretty sure that the proposal will be down for refusal. And that's what was bothering me. So I must press Mr. Round on this, because if we're going to do this because of the nature of the building, rather than the planning considerations, whether it fits and parking and all that, if we have to override all those and say, well, we need this social facility, then I am concerned, because it's not my reading of what we're taught at these planning sessions, that however difficult these decisions are, I've often had to vote for or against things, against my better instincts on emotional grounds, because I wanted it to happen, but I couldn't because it didn't meet the planning considerations. I think we're going to override them. My fear is we're going to override them, Chair, for emotional reasons. And I know if you get planning permission, there's no right of appeal. But that's not good enough for me, because if we'd refused it, there is a right of appeal for emotional reasons. So I want to press Mr. Round on it. I know he's going to say balance, and if that's all he's got to say, with all due respect, don't bother, because we've heard that before. But, you know, I would, in future planning training sessions, I would need to push this point myself, because I'm not happy that we're going to allow this for the wrong reason. Well, the right reason in one sense, but the wrong reason for this particular committee.
Through you, Chair, I'm not just going to say balance, so because I don't think that's fair. Members will know from planning training that the section of the Act that you're looking at is looking at that you should follow planning policy unless material circumstances indicate otherwise. From the officer's point of view, in the officer's report, there are no technical objections to this application. So in terms of the statutory consultees, you will have read within the reports that there are no objections. When we say that it's not perfect, there are elements that we think could be better, but actually we are weighing up those three dimensions, and Councillor Agar alluded to those. So you have the environmental, you have the social, and you have the economic elements, which the NPPF says that you can take into account. So whilst, Councillor Amos, you may be right, there may be some emotional elements, what I have heard as part of the debate are planning elements. The social aspects of planning is something that can be a material consideration, along with the economic. If we had an application for economic development in this location and there were no technical objections in the same way that we have it here, but there were some concerns from members, again, you could balance that in the way that actually we want to support 16 jobs. But we're not looking at that particularly in this aspect. We're looking at increased employment. Yes, so that's one aspect, but there's a host of other things that are being weighed up. And I haven't heard anything that's particularly non-relevant planning aspects that are being considered. It's for members to balance their concerns over the other elements of those benefits that will arrive from this centre. And if they wish to impose additional conditions to make the development acceptable and it meets the tests, therefore they can do that to be able to help them address balance if they so wish.
Right. If we go Councillor Cross, then Councillor Udall, then Councillor Desera.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, just beat you to it, Richard. So the other thing that I failed to mention earlier, which I would just like to also see in, is that the use of the disabled bays outside, that if we're minded to grant permission or if it would help settle that issue, that we could say that those bays within the parking management plan, that those bays should not be used specifically by the Myriad Centre for their minibuses. So that there's not an automatic right of use of those disabled bays. Because if they are for public use, they should be available for public use and not hogged, so to say. Thank you.
Councillor Udall.
Please do not get used to this fact, but I find myself in agreement with Councillor Amos. Doesn't happen very often, and perhaps the offer of a chocolate biscuit may persuade me otherwise. I don't know, but clearly there is a social benefit here, but that social benefit does not help those who have objected to this plan application, does not help the neighbours, and it does not help any potential future users who may feel trapped and confined within the building. I still strongly believe, despite what we've heard today, that if this application was for a gym, we would refuse it. But the only way we are considering it here today is because it's not for a gym and it's for a social need and for a charity. Frequently, I've sat around this table when I've objected to planning applications, and I've heard other members of the planning committee say, we want to refuse this, but we can't because there are no planning grounds. I think what we've got here is a situation where we want to give consent, but shouldn't, because it does not meet our planning guidance and our planning rules, in my observation. And it does not help the people who will be damaged and cause problems to in the neighbouring area as a result of the parking, the overdevelopment, and the other problems which we've seen. You know, I often say that the guiding principle of everything I do in politics is based on the principle not of the greatest good for the greatest number, because we cannot show indifference to individual suffering. And I think the individual suffering which will happen as a result of this application being passed will be considerable to the residents who live next door to the application. So I'm minded at this stage not to support what we're hearing, despite the fact that I want to.
Thank you, Councillor Udall. Just remind members, please, that we are here today to consider this application for this purpose, for the design that we've got in front of us, and, you know, not to allude that it could be something else in the future and all that kind of thing. I think it's fine that to put a use class, an addition for an additional thing, but, you know, we could talk about that for every planning application that we get.
If it was a similar, exactly the same design, but the use was different, we'd be refusing it.
Well, of course we are considering the use of the building in this application, but that is what is before us, and that's it. Councillor Agar, did you want to say something?
To the point where I feel that the discussion is coming to some kind of crisis here, and that perhaps I'd like to propose
I was going to say something.
with those two conditions.
Councillor Sarah, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I thought you'd noted me down.
Yeah, I had.
Oh, sorry.
Yes,
Yes,
sorry.
Sorry.
No, I had a point I wanted to make. So people are talking a lot about parking and issues and worries about parking. Okay. And then other members are talking about how any plan isn't enforced and doesn't really work. Is there an example that can be shared of such conditions that do get enforced and do work, that anyone's aware of? Well, maybe, but I'd like to understand.
Through you, Chair, obviously this is something that we've done, and as I said, in terms of the Listers site, it hasn't been implemented yet. But you'll be aware of parking management plans where, for say retail parks, where retail operators enforce their own parking management plans. There are a number of different schemes in which it can be done. From a planning enforcement point of view, having a plan that is operational and that can be ensured is continued to be operational is something that we can check, we can investigate, we can ensure that it is in place. If it is not being kept and it's not evidence that it's not being kept, we can then serve a breach of condition notice. So there are elements that we can do. We believe that it's enforceable. So just because it hasn't been done yet within the city doesn't mean that it shouldn't be imposed. And I think there are enough examples of how other businesses regulate parking and operationally that gives us the confidence that this can be done.
And could I just see whether or not there is support around the room for having a condition on the space at the front to not leave the buses parked there all day, which I think was what you might have been referring to.
I'm sorry, Councillor, is there a planning condition for the management plan?
So within the traffic management plan,
Yeah.
the plan is, as I understand it informally, to leave the buses out there all day on the front.
Yeah.
Can it be part of the traffic management plan that they volunteer to do to move that bus somewhere else during the day, leaving the spaces free for others?
Through you, Chair, obviously that's something that, in terms of the condition, would be a submission from the applicant, and it will. I would suggest that if if members were minded to approve and permission given, that an informative was added to that to declare what the committee's wishes were. It would be something that we couldn't enforce if they were there. So planning officers can't obviously give parking tickets, but actually we could enforce the management plan. So we would encourage them to include that within the management plan to be able to free up that, because that is very clearly a desire of the planning committee, and it would certainly be noted, and the applicant is here today, so they know exactly what is being suggested, and I think that would be certainly something that we could look at.
Councillor Rand, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, thank you. Following on Councillor Thread's point there about that, but the worry about that is if the minibuses have moved away during the day, that means residents, quite rightly, can park with a blue badge, can park in those disabled spaces. So when the buses come back at the end of the day to pick up their service users, they won't be able to use them because somebody else and residents are parked there already, quite rightly. So we're going to have conflict, aren't we? Yeah.
Through you, Chair, just to help, and I think that's why I suggested that that's a discussion that we need to have with the applicant in terms of their arrangements, and it would be an informative rather than a requirement, because it needs to be worked out properly to ensure that it works both for residents and for users, so that it doesn't provide that conflict. Now, it could be that one of the minibuses is used so that part of the disabled bay is freed up, but the other is not. There are other options that we can look at to be able to make sure that that is provided.
Presumably the situation that Councillor Round's describing could be happening today anyway.
The point of process, Chair, surely it can't be in order for this committee to be granting planning permission and then afterwards go to the applicants and try and get something out of them when there's no guarantee whatsoever that we'll get anything out of them. Surely this kind of arrangement, parking arrangement, needs to be built in at the time of the decision, not, well, once you've got your permission, of course they've got no incentive to do anything, have they? And there's no obligation for them to do anything.
Through you, Chair, it can be built into the condition. It's entirely up to members. If they feel that that is something that needs to be made and makes the development acceptable, it can be built into the condition. From an officer's point of view, what I'm saying is that if it's not something that is so important, depends on the weight that you're attributing to that particular aspect of whether you need it to be an advisory, that this is what the desire of the committee is, or it's an absolute, this is what the committee wants. So it can be built into the condition. It's entirely up to how the committee wishes to balance that weight which they attribute to that condition.
Paul, can I just ask something? And it would have probably been helpful if Karen was here, but if there is a resident, say on Henry Street, who's disabled and needs a disabled space, they can apply for it through the county council if they need one. And they would then have a space outside their home, which is probably more useful than one on right round the corner and on a different road. That's what I'm thinking.
I think that we're making it too complicated for our own use here. As I understand it, we have got no power legally or any other way to impose restrictions on who can and cannot park on the public highway. The only measure which can be taken is through a traffic regulation order, which we do not have the power to impose or even suggest. We can't do that through conditions or any other matter, any other way. So you can make a condition, but it can't be enforced. You can say what you like, but anybody could park there if they've got a blue badge. And it doesn't really include in the minibus, which they can now. And by condition when the minibus moves, you cannot enforce that at all at any time unless it's personalised under a traffic regulation order, which we can't do.
Through you, Chair, I would agree in terms of the on-street parking, and I think I said that earlier. What we can enforce is if there is a parking management plan that says that the minibuses will move, we can enforce the parking management plan because we can say that the centre is not adhering to that parking management plan which has been agreed as part of a planning condition.
But who will enforce that, Chair?
Yep. What I'm concerned about is that what we've heard from residents is that we have heard about cars being parked on Henry Street. I think there is an issue to do with the disabled space, but I thought that the biggest issue was from residents having the cars blocking outside their own houses. So I'm wondering whether we're kind of going down the wrong route a little bit here, because actually it's the 8 cars that we're expecting from the 16 staff for the 16 to 20 clients in the building that we're considering. Okay.
Chair, just on that point, I may be wrong, but obviously you're going to have vehicles with residents, coming and going and so on. But you're going to have doctors and nurses and all sorts of people and tradespeople and deliveries as well. Where do these go? There doesn't seem to be any provision for them.
Yeah, I think it's that we've got this building already with those deliveries and vehicles already, so that's not changing, is it?
But this place is getting bigger, got more residents in.
Yeah. Councillor Udall?
Again, please tell me I'm completely wrong. I'm more than happy to be corrected. But as I understand it, the only measure which we could do as a planning committee is to actually condition that the applicant here funds and supplies and supports a potential consultation exercise for a residence parking scheme for Henry Street.
Councillor Udall, there has been a consultation for a residential parking scheme on Henry Street.
Yeah.
And the county council have put on hold all the residential parking schemes across the county at the moment.
I'm aware of that.
So, and that
I'm
is
aware
not,
of that.
But that isn't something that we can
Yes, we
consider
can,
today,
Chair,
because
the
it's not
reason
in
the County
place.
Council have put on hold is a financial reason. If we ask the applicants to actually fund a residence parking scheme, that can actually allow it to proceed. It's a budgetary restraint on the County Council, not a political decision not to proceed. If I understand correctly, Councillor Amos will tell me if I'm wrong. Yes, well, you were. But my...
Through you, Chair. In theory, if to make the development acceptable, there can be a condition that has been can be imposed, and it has been done elsewhere to require that consultation process is undertaken. What a condition can't do is impose, as you, I think, mentioned before, Councillor Udall, is that you cannot impose a TRO as part of it, but it can look at funding the consultation exercise. But we can't do that because, because the consultation may come out and say no. I'm not saying, but that.
If I understand correctly, we can condition that the developer, the applicant, can actually undertake finance the consultation exercise required for a residence parking scheme, and if that is positive, they will then be able to finance the implementation of it.
I do believe that the consultation has already been carried out, and it has literally just been stopped by the county council.
In that case, if there was a positive response, we could condition that the applicant actually pays for the implementation.
Through you, Chair, because it would be a financial contribution, and that would need to be secured through a Section 106 agreement. Obviously, that's not something that the County Council has suggested as part of their conditions, but again, it would be a matter for the councillors, this committee, to be able to consider whether that would be suitable, and it would be a matter for the applicants to agree to enter into that. So a recommendation, if was to be moved, could be phrased in such a way in that terms. But that's, at the moment, we're not in that, but I can help members if they're needed with such wording as we get to that point.
Councillor Agar.
At this point, I'm a bit concerned about that suggestion because we are talking about a charity. I'm not sure that the Charity Commission would wear such a, it depends really on the constraints of charities, what you're allowed to spend and on what. I'm not quite clear that that would be the right use of charitable money.
Through you, Chair, in fairness, that's probably not a planning consideration, whilst that is a consideration in terms of the grant funding which the charity has got in terms of the reuse and the rebuilding of this site. But if it is something that members feel has to be imposed to make the development acceptable, that's a planning consideration for us. How they actually implement that is something for them to consider.
I do think that if we look at the objections that have come in and what Councillor Bissett was saying before, that the parking on Henry Street is a key element of this design, this application. And actually, we're talking about 8 cars, but 8 cars on that road would have a significant and severe impact. So perhaps warrants that. But obviously, the 8 cars have then got to park elsewhere, but they could be more spread, perhaps. I don't know what you think, Councillor Agar.
I mean, I think it was the heads of terms just aren't there to do this at the moment. At least not as far as I've read.
No, and through you, Chair, there's no heads of terms, and at the moment that hasn't been broached with the applicant of whether they're in agreement. So what I would foresee, if members wish to go down that route, it would be a sort of a double-headed recommendation, which would be something along the lines of delegated authority to Director of Planning and Governance to approve the application, subject to the signing of a Section 106 agreement to secure the funds for a traffic regulation order to provide a residence parking scheme, and the conditions as listed, plus the additional 2 conditions that members have resulted. Should the applicant not enter into that agreement, there would be a second recommendation, which would be that delegated authority to refuse on the basis that there would not enter into the Section 106 agreement, and would be a reason by feelings of it that the development would result in displacement of existing parking that would result in increased pressure on an already congested area, which would result in highway safety dangers, something along those lines.
Couldn't put that better myself. I would be happy to remove that.
Yeah. Councillor Agar, I believe you were proposing before.
I'd be quite happy with that suggestion.
Yeah, so that would be a proposal with those 3 extra conditions. And of course, the amended condition that we had before in the late paper dated number 10.
Yeah, through you, Chair, just to be clarify then, because I did that slightly sketchy. And all of that would be in conjunction with consultation with Chair and Vice Chair. I think that would need to be agreed. So what I did say, and again, it's for members to consider, is that it would be delegated authority to approve, which would be to the Director of Planning and Governance, to approve subject to the entering in and the signing of a Section 106 agreement for a traffic regulation, to fund a traffic regulation order, both consultation and, should it be agreed, implementation of a traffic regulation order for a residence parking scheme, plus the conditions as listed within the report, plus a condition 13 for a parking management plan to be submitted, but also condition 14 limiting the use of the building. And the second part of that recommendation would be to delegation to refuse should the applicant not enter into the Section 106 agreement on the basis that the development would result in a displacement of existing parking and increase in the size of the building that would result in parking pressures, within the area that would result in parking pressures on an already congested area that would result in highway safety issues for existing residents and other users. But all those would be agreed with Chair and Vice Chair prior to any particular wording being agreed.
Chair, Mr Round is doing his best to be helpful, and I appreciate that. But you do know in a residence parking zone that does not guarantee your parking space. It doesn't guarantee your parking space.
Absolutely.
So we're back to the original problem.
Well, it does though stop other people parking there who aren't residents. So we've seen that in the Arboretum. I totally agree with you. One of the problems with residents' parking scheme is that there are just too many cars, but we can't solve that today. What we need to solve is the fact that the residents on Henry Street are particularly concerned, and 8 cars on their road would have a severe impact. Yes, and if they are more dispersed, then it will have a lesser impact.
But would the condition then, through your chair, would that would count as ongoing expenditure? Because obviously with the residents' parking zone, it's got to be renewed, hasn't it? And you've got to pay. If the residents aren't going to pay, then who else is going to pay? I didn't know that 106 money could be counted as recurring expenditure.
Through your chair, Councillor Amos is absolutely correct. So in terms of the Section 106 agreement, as suggested, and what I was trying to be helpful with, and I appreciate you saying I've been helpful, is that it was to provide a contribution towards the consultation and the implementation, and that figure would be agreed with Chair and Vice Chair in consultation with the Highway Authority, but it wouldn't be the ongoing element. But that would be something that would enable the resident scheme to be in place, which I think is something that residents have been looking for. So it would be something that would provide that which at the present moment in time is not provided.
So we've got a proposal with Councillor Agar. Do I have a seconder, please? Yeah. Come on, Councillor Amos, you'd like to second it, wouldn't you? Councillor Udall, would you like to? Fantastic, thank you. So based on that then, based on the conditions that Paul has outlined, can we vote on approval for the scheme with the amended and additional conditions out, as said? Sorry?
And Section 106.
And the Section 106 agreement being delegated to Managing Director of Planning and the Chair of Governance. There we go. Right. Can I see a show of hands in support of the scheme with those conditions? Okay. Against, please? That's right. Thank you, Councillor Amos. And abstentions? That's 2. So that's carried. Yeah, we're just going to have a 5-minute comfort break, please. In fact, we'll make it 10, please. We'll come back. If we can come back at 10 to. Thank you. Okay, everybody, welcome back after that short comfort break. We're moving on to agenda item 9, which is the Scala project, and we've got Dale presenting for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Before I begin the presentation with the Scala, I'd like to bring the committee's attention to the late paper item where conditions 3 and 7 of the Scala have been updated and amended. Agenda item 9 relates to the former Scala Theatre and Corn Exchange building on Angel Street. Full planning and listed building consent is sought for the proposed internal and external refurbishments and changes of use from sui generis, from an amusement arcades to a performance arts centre including cafe, bar, event and gallery space. By way of context, these applications have been submitted following the withdrawal of an earlier application for full and listed building consent for a 500-seat theatre with ancillary uses. And the reasons for withdrawal of the previous applications are set out within paragraphs 1.5 to 1.9 on page 42 of the agenda. The current project before committee day forms the cornerstone of the regeneration project arising from the government's Future High Streets Fund, which will see the regeneration of the northern part of Worcester city centre. The proposal will provide Worcester with an opportunity to diversify the cultural offer within the city centre and make it accessible and visible to a much wider audience. I will now run through a series of slides. The image before the committee illustrates the site context. With the site highlighted, Angel Street is to the north, Angel Place to the west, with the cross located approximately 55 metres further to the east. In the first aerial image before you, this is viewed south towards and over the application site in the middle of the image, with the Crown Gate on the right-hand side. This next aerial image is a view east, over and across the application site towards the cross. This slide illustrates the frontage of the Grade 2 listed Corn Exchange, which dates from 1848. With this elevation viewed south from Angel Street. You note the facade has been modified to incorporate Crown Passage through to the Wetherspoons Yard. And although currently vacant, the Corn Exchange has seen a variety of uses, most recently as a restaurant. The next slide before the committee illustrates some of the existing building condition within the Corn Exchange, including at basement level, with the proposal seeking to reuse and reactivate the associated kitchen and offer enhanced access. The next slide includes a snapshot of some of the existing building conditions within the Corn Exchange at ground floor level, with the part glazed roof evidence in the full height space. This next slide includes a snapshot of some of the existing site conditions within Crown Passage between the Corn Exchange and the Scala. This next slide image illustrates the spaces at mezzanine level. Again, this is within the Corn Exchange building. On this next image, the existing roof of the Corn Exchange is illustrated with the glazed roof lanterns evident at the top. The next image illustrates and highlights the elevations of the Scala, which has 3 levels of small foyers in good to poor condition. The ground floor was most recently occupied by an amusement arcade called Shipley's, but is now currently vacant, as are the upper spaces. The external proposals would in part include the reversal of the modern Shipley's canopy in favour of a design reminiscent of the original Scala theatre canopy. Also, with ducting and balustrades proposed externally and the making good on elevations. on the flank elevation particularly, and behind the roof parapet respectively. This image illustrates some of the existing conditions, primarily at ground within the Scala, on the approach from street level, as well as the double height space evident, with much of the brickwork damp in poor condition and proposed for careful refurbishment and restoration. The next image before committee illustrates some of the existing condition, this time at first floor level within the Scala. Again, careful fabric restoration where possible is proposed, and also certain features will be better revealed. The next image is taken at roof level, this time on the Scala. It is illustrated of the parapet detailing and the existing condition, which in this case requires some repair, inclusive of single ply roof with applied seams and also provision of solar panels as part of the overall sustainability package. Having illustrated the external and internal conditions of both the Corn Exchange, which is Grade 2 listed, and the locally listed Scala buildings, the two are illustrated here in context. Number 2 in the case of the Corn Exchange, and the Scala indicated as number 1 on the image before members. With this aerial image also shown for contextual purposes to show the site in relation to the surrounding built environment. The next image before the committee is a CGI image. It's a visual of the proposed as implemented, noting the proposed canopy and fascia level signage to facilitate a sense of place and function upon arrival. Turning to floor plans. At basement level within the Corn Exchange, the existing kitchen would be reactivated to serve the proposed cafe and bar at ground level. The functionality would be similar to that previously used in the case of a restaurant, albeit in this case with enhanced access. Turn to the next slide. The existing ground floor fit out within the Scala Theatre would be removed to reveal the historic fabric. The existing structural interventions would be retained to divide the ground floor into an improved foyer with circulation space with a new enlarged get-in at ground level. In this case with a small 60-person studio called The Box, a studio within the triple height volume that was the stage end of the cinema, in that case with a capacity of 178, which in this case would be called The Stage. New WC facilities, a change in places facility, would also be included at this level. In addition, this plan also illustrates the Crown Passage works, where the existing paving slab would be retained and relayed at a higher level, improving access for all. At upper level, included at first floor, this would contain office space and meeting space for various arts organisations and businesses. At second floor level, the third studio, which is the screen, would use the historic cinema rake beams to provide a partially raked seating area for a maximum capacity for 200 people. Further acoustic works and restoration works are also proposed at this level. Finally, the next 3 slides before the committee are the elevations, inclusive from Angel Street and Angel Place, in the case of the lower of the 2 images before committee. You will note in some of these images the balustrade works and also the external plant ducting. This slide is a cross-section, is a snapshot through the proposed Scala. This one illustrates the full height stage studio, also in context to the smaller box studio, with also front of house access, circulation spaces. Again, similar to the previous one, but turning to the Corn Exchange. This image illustrates the Corn Exchange as proposed, with the full height space evident, which be used as a cafe and bar. The next 2 images before the committee illustrates the ground across both the Corn Exchange and the Scala, This is contextual, so that one will be able to view the interactions between the two respective buildings, noting the get-in and access point within the Scala, the foyer, and the various uses and spaces which would be inclusive and flexible to enable a range of arts, culture, and performance spaces. Again, in a similar manner, this slide through at upper level, second floor, illustrates the comparative buildings with their functionalities, where one will be able to get a snapshot of the stage in terms of its full height nature. Finally, this slide illustrates the traffic regulation order in force on Angel Street and Angel Place, which prohibits access between the hours of 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Officers have assessed and determined that the proposals before you would have a sustaining and enhancing impact on the listed building, with a positive impact on the current appearance of the conservation area. It is considered the proposals would enhance Worcester city centre, bringing the listed and locally listed buildings back into long-term viable use for appropriate city centre activities, which will provide increased footfall along Angel Street and Angel Place, provide additional employment opportunities, improving opportunities for existing and potential local businesses, and facilitated increased access to the arts and culture offers within the city and beyond. Furthermore, the proposals before the committee would also exceed the requirements of Policy 27 in the local plan with regards to the renewables contribution, which in this case being 33.5% against a policy requirement of 10%. This is weighed heavily in the balance. Paragraphs 8.7 to 8.9 on page 70 of the agenda set out the benefits of the proposed development in detail. Although in short, officers are of the opinion that the submitted scheme has indicated more than sufficient detail to warrant approval and considered that the proposals constitute an environmentally, socially and economically sustainable form of development that both accords with the framework and the development plan as a whole. Considering all of the above, the detail set out within the report, it is recommended the applications for both full and planning permission and listed building consent are approved subject to the conditions as contained and set out within the committee report. Finally, that concludes the presentation for this item. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dale. We've now got a representation from the architect, Helen Grossley, is that how you say it? You've got 5 minutes, and I'll just start flapping when we get near, if that's okay. And I'll start the timer when you start. Thank you.
I only wanted to make a couple of points. The first one, perhaps, to emphasise the opportunity this project gives us to repair and stabilise a building that is deteriorating. Our proposals are to remove the existing roof in very poor condition over the Scala and replace it with an acoustically separated, well-insulated roof, to do gutter repairs around the listed building, the Corn Exchange, to prevent the ongoing water ingress problems there. So all in all, it gives us an opportunity to stabilise and conserve the fabric of a pair of really interesting buildings that are very much part of the history of Worcester. The only other point really I wanted to make was perhaps to help distinguish slightly the way in which the 3 studios within the Scala building and the Corn Exchange itself might be used. So the box studio at ground floor in the studio in the Scala, relatively simple space, good for small-scale workshops or perhaps for meetings or events. The tall space at the rear, called the stage, which was the original screen end of the original cinema, is probably in the poorest condition of any of the elements of the building. There's been a lot of water ingress at that end, but it still has a really extraordinary character. And there are still some elements like a decorative frieze of the Black Worcester pears, a sort of heliograph logo above a frieze, some peacock feathers, fantastic. The proposal, in fact, for the collective that has formed of arts organisations to operate the building is to use that space as really quite a creative, active workshop space. So it's going to have a simple polished concrete floor. It might be used for immersive exhibitions. It might be used for creative workshops. There could be some music in there. There's going to be some retractable seating. So really quite a flexible but quite a robust, tough space that responds to its really rather extraordinary triple height character. The studio at the top of the space, which they're calling the screen, is a calmer space. It's not as tall. It's going to have a sprung wooden floor, so it'll be usable for dance and other kind of workshops. It's going to have 4 fixed tiers of seats and some loose seating, and actually it will make a really good cinema space for showing art house films, pop-ups, whatever happening up there, conferences and so on, and it seats, I can't remember, it's sort of in the kind of 150, 160, Dale, you may have the figure in front of you, but it will be used, I think, for perhaps slightly more formal events, and it connects more directly to the in better condition historic foyer spaces with their decorative cornices and beautiful terrazzo stairs. So I think the scheme is trying to respond to what we have, to stabilise it and to really use its character. The Corn Exchange, again, we're stabilising, we're putting in better quality light fittings, LED, improving the condition of the toilets and so on, but not fundamentally changing the space. It will be great as a bar cafe space and perhaps some pop-up music. So really the scheme is trying to respond to the fabric that we have. Thank you very much. I'm really happy to answer any technical questions. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you very much, and also thank you very much for coming on the site visit today. I think people found your presence there really useful. Do I have any questions for Helen, please? Right, we'll just go around like this, if that's okay. So, Councillor Cross first.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you. Found it really informative and really very helpful today on the site visit. I'm really encouraged by the renewable contribution of energy, the renewable energy installations providing over 30%, as opposed to 10% minimum, and looking at the plans and seeing how the roof is not so visible within the majority of the scheme for most people, except for passing gulls. If there's space for additional solar panels to be installed, and with the nature of the challenge of retrofit of panels, so if it would be possible, subject to budget, and if that be something you'd be amenable to, about provision of extra mounting points, such that in future, without compromising the membrane, additional panels could be installed. That would be fantastic, because I think that the need is very clear, and I think if it minimises, it's always easier to do at the point of doing the work rather than revisiting and coming back later. So applying that would be fantastic. Thank you. And the other element was within the former, the building next door that was the restaurant. What's it called? The Corn Exchange. Thank you. Sorry, brain fade there. The roof glazing. Just as a sort of a caution element, if we could just do a check as to whether it is safety glass, or if it's not, whether an internal film could be applied such that one doesn't get a challenge of a broken pane falling from height, and that would give a lot of comfort. But really enjoyed the visit, and I really like the efforts being made to not just obliterate what was there or paint over, but to sort of stabilise, and also to, with an eye on the budget, of course, but actually bringing something that's in peril now, because we're seeing the damage that's starting to happen, the damp, a failing roof is one of the fastest ways to kill a heritage building. So really appreciate the efforts that are being made by a lot of people to bring this together, and thank you for your input.
Yeah, Yeah, thank you, Councillor Cross. I mean, one thing that on the site visit is very clear is that you are looking forward to taking out some of the newer elements to reveal more of the older ones. And I suppose what we were seeing is there are gaps across the building at the moment of the heritage assets. So we're really hopeful that you're going to find more stuff. That must be quite exciting for you as an architect. Yeah. Was it Councillor Round? No, Councillor Amos?
Yes, Chair. Good afternoon. Just a couple of questions. I'm always wary of developers coming into our city and knocking it about, if I can put it bluntly. Now, clearly that's not what you're going to do. But could you just highlight very briefly for me, please, the things, the main items that you're going to renovate? And I like the idea of stripping away the modern and seeing the original. That sounds great to me. And also, the things that you will be removing, and what will you be replacing them with? That's the first question.
So in terms of what we're stripping out, when the amusement arcade was inserted, all the historic walls were lined out with plasterboard partitions, and a laying grid tiled ceiling was put through. Everything was covered in carpet and sort of beveled mirrors. So we are stripping out those linings. The idea is to go back to the original historic walls of the Scala from 1922, on which there are still some decorative features. And the condition of those features varies as you go across the building. We have some photographic evidence of what it looked like before, but it is very important, as far as we can, to retain those. The question mark on my voice is to do with the extent to which water ingress has led them to deteriorate. So while the cast plaster mouldings are in perfectly good condition, a lot of the plain plaster on the walls, the lime has died and it's coming off. So there has to be a careful approach to what we can keep, what we can stabilise, and how we cleanly manage to keep that interior. In terms of the chord exchange, strip out, again, there's a degree of sort of application of mirror, some nasty bits of drop ceiling over the bar and so on and so on. There's a bit of stripping out we can do there. But unfortunately, we're not in a position to go further and strip out those cantilevering balustrades that run around the edge of the mezzanine. If there was a future project where we were able to remove those, put a simple balustrade around and be able to see upstairs, that would be great. But for the moment, at least, we're bringing the building back into use without significant alterations, but some stripping off. Is that, yes?
Yes, that's a good question. Well, it follows on to my next question, which is, clearly we don't know exactly what the layout of that's going to be. Some decisions still got to be made. So my question really is, obviously you're planning on what you know now, what you can do now, but then what if a decision is made fairly soon, but it's not exactly what you're expecting? Will you then have to change what you're planning to do, or will that cause destruction, or can you easily adapt to the changing use of the building?
So one of the reasons that a lot of that stripping out hasn't happened is there is asbestos there. So there is a process currently ongoing of an asbestos survey and then removal, and then an assessment of what is behind those lay-in grid ceilings. In terms of the extent to which it would change the project, I don't think it will change the fundamental provision and location of the spaces that we're putting in. We've done a lot of archival research to assess what we think is there, and when we remove, for instance, Shipley's had a funny little escape stair and a staff toilet at the back. We've looked at the old, we know that we should manage to get back to the primary structural divisions that are not historic but are existing in the form of really quite tall walls and steel structures which are in perfectly good condition and will enable us to separate the studio spaces that we're proposing.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Paul's just got to comments, mate.
Yeah, it was just, I thought it might be helpful, members, at that juncture, just to mention that obviously we're dealing with a listed building and we're dealing with a locally listed building. So in terms of the work to the Scala and the internal works, there's no control over that because it's locally listed. So what goes on internally in that space, as in the physical strip out, the physical partitions, the planning authority has no control over that. Within the listed building, that's where the listed building consent works in terms of the internal elements. And one of the critical things, I think, as part of the listed building works is the installation of a new lift, which will provide future proofing of access to the upper levels should that be required. So I thought it was just worth, whilst it's really interesting what's going on within the Scala, and I think that's really quite important for us to understand, actually in terms of the planning merits and our considerations, actually we need to discount that in terms of actually what's going on physically. We can look at the spaces, we can look at how it's used, but in terms of the physical works, that's not something for us to consider. Hopefully that's helpful.
Cool. Councillor Cleary?
Thanks, Chair. I've got two questions. Well, one question split into two, really. And it relates to some of the things raised by the Conservation Advisory Panel. And that's two things that aren't happening. So I just wonder if you can elaborate on the reasons why these things aren't happening, because I wish they were. The first one is the removal of the previously proposed upper link between the Scala and the Corn Exchange was regrettable, in their opinion. And the second one, that not making use of the Corn Exchange mezzanine level was also seen as regrettable. So I'm just wondering on what the background for them, those two things not happening are, please.
I can give the answer from the architect's point of view. Obviously, it's a project where it's a whole consortium of people that are acting as clients. So, but in terms of how the project has developed, it would be great. I have to say, it would be great to be able to occupy the mezzanine. It would be great to be able to make that connection through. There is a significant cost in doing so, because there are significant repairs to be done to the mezzanine, number one, and number two, with modern building regulations, it requires the addition of another staircase connection down. So in fact, the cost of doing it is quite significant. I think the spaces that it would provide are great, but they're not necessarily the highest priority in the whole scheme. So in terms of where the money for the project is spent, the value in pulling the Scala together, making the studios work, and putting those toilets together, which are super important to do now. Whereas I think when we look at the Corn Exchange, and as just mentioned, the proposal to put in a lift that would allow future use of that mezzanine, we're trying to include within the scheme any work that we are currently doing and allowance for its future use, without doing the significant expenditure of the new staircases and so on and so on. It is fundamentally a cost reason.
Councillor Stanley?
Chair, thanks very much. Couple of points. Firstly, the report, part of the report, brings up the subject of archaeology. Now, clearly, before you know, some of the things that other people have discussed, this is something we're going to have to get quite a clear understanding of. Now, in your professional opinion, the site itself, the overall sort of footprint of the site, potentially what proportion of that might yield significant archaeology?
There is potentially significant archaeology under various areas of the site. There is a likelihood that there are some medieval basements. One of the things about the revised scheme submitted, however, is unlike the previous scheme that required excavation in order to provide plenum-fed air to stall seating, this is not required in this scheme. And therefore, we're not having to do any digging down. And we're very carefully using the existing structure, again, so that we don't have to put in new structure with new piled foundations. So there is a chance that there is archaeology underneath there, and I'm sure perhaps the officers will talk about what is understood from the Worcester Archaeology Report, but the scheme has been revised so that it does not impact on what is beneath.
Okay, I'll leave the other point to the wider conversation, but thanks very much.
Councillor Alcott, did you have a question? I can't remember.
Chair, thank you. Just a comment, just pleased to hear how it's being restored. It is nice, I think, as Councillor Amos said, just to know that something, if it goes ahead, will be kept and restored rather than something being knocked down and damaged, because it is one of our assets as the city. That's all. Thank you. The question.
Councillor Udall? Councillor Smith? Councillor De Sarah? Councillor Agar?
Thank you, Chair. May I start by echoing your thanks to our officers and to Ms Grassley for a really informative visit today. It certainly gave me a much greater appreciation of the detail and complexity of what you're trying to achieve. And with that in mind, my question would be, for the benefit of particularly members who weren't there to hear you, was that could you explain a bit about the difference of what you're trying to achieve in terms of renovation and stabilisation, because there is a difference, and it's a question of what can be achieved within budget. We do have constraints. Could you explain that a bit and illustrate it for the members?
Yes, absolutely. And I think there are almost 3 distinct levels of heritage fabric within the Scala. Again, we're talking about a locally listed building, but the character of that building is one of the things that I think is going to hopefully be really successful in this ongoing project. So looking at that, when we went through the foyer, so the 1922 foyer, which has got a lovely but covered in sticky carpet, goo and paint terrazzo staircase with broken nosings and terrazzo floors. It's got decorative peacock tails cornices, probably kind of 90% there. It's a very finished space. So the ambition for the project for that is to restore it, i.e. it feels complete, the walls are plastered, we'll mend the plaster, we'll mend the cornices within that set of spaces, because they sing and they have a unified character. When you then go into the kind of barn-like space that was the original cinema, the upper level is not in such a bad condition. So where there are the historic mouldings that run around the original kind of bullseye window features, we can restore those, stick them back on, we can mend some plaster, we can mend the cracks. And again, the walls within that space will be stabilised, but they will also to some measure be restored. We're not going to be able to put back the original highly decorative fibrous plaster ceiling that must have fallen down at one point because it's not there at all. So the skeleton of the timber roof structure and the ceiling joists will be visible. So it's a sort of half state where you keep what you can, and generally you give it a kind of unity. The screen space at the back is in the worst condition. Water pouring through has meant that a lot of the plaster has deteriorated. We have to remove the plaster that is flaking off, but we're hoping to be able to keep some of it. But in that space with its wet walls, which need to be allowed to dry out, we are not proposing to restore. We're not proposing to put back all those decorative features, but actually that chimes quite well. So it will be stabilised. I think you could call it arrested decay is often an architectural term that is used, and it's going to be part of a character of a very creative space. So we don't have, we don't have the budget to put it all back, but I think even if we did, we might stand back and consider how particularly that triple height space at the back tells so many stories of what's happened in Worcester. There is the 1922 cinema, absolutely, but then there's a set of cafe-style windows when it was converted, and a line of gypsum plaster that runs from a lowered ceiling line, and it's been an alleyway through, and there's all sorts of stories that you can tell in the remnants of the history of that space, which we would like to keep in situ, rather than taking it back to a 1922 condition. Thank you.
Put Councillor Round.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thanks. I'm really excited by the vision that you've got. It's really, it's so good to see, and I'm excited to see what the plans are for the Scala. Just got a couple of questions, if I could, from an accessibility point of view. There's going to be a lift internally to allow access. Do you know any or more details about that lift access? Because I find very often that many public buildings have a lift for accessibility, but they're unusable by many wheelchair users because mobility scooters are getting heavier and heavier and they can't use those lifts. So do you have any more information on that at all?
Yes, it is. It's not the standard minimum lift, because we need, for instance, within the Scala, to take stuff up and down that is part of a limited, but say backdrop or set backdrop up there, and take musical instruments up and down. So the lift is larger than the minimum. And the same is actually also true for the Corn Exchange, where it's not the standard footprint, so it should be able to, mobility scooters should be able to use it. Overall, there is an accessibility proposal that involves public realm works, which aren't subject to this planning application, but allow us to, currently there are steps up to the entrance, so it allows us to get a seamless through threshold. Then the lift will take you up so you can be able to get to all floors within the Scala, and there will be a range of wheelchair seating within the various studios. And then within the Corn Exchange, there's a very tiny, of the sort you described, lift at the moment, which will be replaced with a larger lift, which will take you from basement to that ground and then up, hopefully, to a future mezzanine who's, yep.
Just following on, if I could, just a couple of questions. It's not a planning issue as such, but it's just something I want to hear from your point of view. In terms of the proposed planned use of the building is going to be very much inclusive arts, and there are noticed that a few disability groups are involved in the proposal. I'm a bit surprised that there's no plans for a sensory room. I know that's probably not part of the remit that you've had, or have you got any thoughts or comments on that? Because given the users are, it's arts, crafts, it's a very sensory overloading environment, and I just thought that that might be an aspect that should really be included in the plans.
While there isn't provision of a sensory room, we have done a bit of consultation with, they're called something like the Monday Afternoon Club, who did, yes, Monday Night Club, about how we could support neurodivergent groups. So working on things like not having dark coloured mats at thresholds, thinking about mirrors in toilets potentially having blinds to go over them, so that although no, there isn't currently provision for a sensory room, we are trying to accommodate more access in the broadest sense. So it's not just about mobility, it's about all users.
Yeah. Thank you. I'd just like to hear about your proposals for the elevation. The canopy at the moment is at the blue. Could you tell us what your plans are for that, please?
We have some photographic evidence, actually, with a picture of Tarzan and Jane standing on top of it, that we know that historically there was a readograph, so the classic sort of illuminated cinema signage which has bars that get labels put on it. And we think that there is some of that structure behind that blue canopy, but we also think there's some modern steel structure as well behind it. We would like to reinstate a readograph as per the visualisation that Dale put up earlier, and we would also like to include, and I noticed the typography isn't quite right on that visualisation, 2 Scala signs that echo the font that's used on the existing building. So the idea really is to make it more evidently an arts building. It's a kind of language of signage and welcome that is commonly held, I think. Yes, so we're very much looking forward to getting rid of the big blue lump. The other thing that it's going to give us an opportunity to do is currently that canopy and the painting of the terracotta underneath it divorce the streetscape from the actually very fine terracotta work on the upper levels. So what we're going to do, hopefully with the DOF paint removal scheme, is take off that white paint and reveal the terracotta that's underneath. So it brings something more of that original quality back onto the street elevation.
Great, lovely, thank you. Dale, did you want to say something? Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Following on from Helen's point, I'd just like to bring the committee's attention to page 72 of the agenda, condition 5, where the council have also got a safeguarding condition regarding the precise details and the extent of the survival of the front canoping. They should be submitted to and approved in writing. So that is an element that's been agreed and we have further control over.
Thank you, Dale. That's really useful. Do I have any further questions for Helen at all? Are we happy to say thank you? Yep. Thank you very much. You've honestly very, very useful. Thank you. Now, I've gone to open the debate. Anyone got any questions for Paul, first of all? Thank you. Councillor Amos, go first again. Good.
Yeah, I've got a question for Mr. Round. I know he's anticipating it, but he won't get this one. Gulls. Now, since, well, in all honesty, since work is going to have to be done to the roof, it does make sense to put some protective measures up there. When I came and parked at the Guildhall on Tuesday for 40 minutes, just 40 minutes, as soon as I came back, right down the side of the car, a gull I don't know whether it targeted my car in particular, which it may have done, but the fact is, seriously, Chair, what it shows is how bad the situation is. 40 minutes in a Guildhall car park, and your car is covered in bird mess that you have to clean off because it corrodes the paint. And clearly, if they're attracted there, if we're talking about restaurants, eateries, and just people wandering around, they don't want to be pestered with these vicious flying rats. We want to get rid of them once and for all. Sorry? I was talking about gulls, not people. So will Mr. Round, could he advise, in terms of this renovation, that if you're going to do work on the roof, you put some anti-gull measures up there? I would suggest nets, because they're the most effective things you can do. They get caught and they won't come back again. But seriously, it's going to be an issue. Let's take the opportunity, Chair, to do something while we're doing work on the roof.
Through you, Chair, that was actually raised during this committee site visit, so you'll be pleased that your fellow colleagues are on the same page as you. And it was confirmed that as part of the works that those measures are going to be looked at. Whether it is going to be netting or another form of deterrent, that is going to be considered, but certainly gull deterrents will be incorporated within the scheme.
Councillor Cleary.
It's not a question, but I've had 5 missed calls from my other half, so I want to go and find out why she's phoned me. Be back in 2 minutes, all right? Is that all right?
If you leave the room, you won't be able to vote. Okay. So would you like me? Yes. Would you like me to give an adjournment for 5 minutes? Yes, please. Okay. Let's do that then. Okay. Thank you, Margaret. If that's possible. Okay, so we're back after that short adjournment. I can't remember. Did anyone have any further questions for the officers, please? Councillor Cross?
More of a comment, please, Chair. Thank you very much. To the appreciation of condition 3 being updated in the late papers to address the concerns raised by the Conservation Advisory Panel about the ventilation ducting and the railings, the two visible elements. So I think in my mind that condition 3 addresses the concerns raised on page 50, paragraph 6.12. So thank you all for being on the ball.
Agar?
Thank you. This one really is for Paul Round. Paul, I'd like to just draw everyone's attention really to the date on which the application was registered, the timing of it, and the government's decision on enhancing biodiversity, because I think that came after this application came in, and hence the added condition 7, I think. Because it seems to me we couldn't actually ask for enhancement without an extra condition, could we?
Through you, Chair, the NPPF does allow measurable gains, even prior to the amendment of the latest legislation. The requirement for 10% is now set in stone for applications that were received after the 12th of February. So, yes, this came in prior to that, but what we are looking at as part of that updated condition 7 is the flexibility of not just bat and bird boxes, but what other enhancements may be able to be provided. So, yes, we are looking at enhancements, but we're not looking at a percentage, we're looking at a measurable gain.
Councillor Desiree?
I just wanted to make a comment. It's not really a question. I'd like to highlight that I think what's being proposed here is delivering an affordable, moderately sized space that the city has needed and called for, rather than trying to replace the Swan Theatre. I think the local arts groups are excited about the prospect of being able to use it, because they have been consulted in getting to this point. And I think the city will gain hugely from the deliberately flexible space and the restoration of beautiful buildings, or get them back into use anyway, as far as we can. And finally, the cultural aspects. I was delighted to hear that it's almost a planning condition, or maybe it is, that things like foreign films are going to be shown there. It is designed to be a very open to different cultures, open to expanding the cultural richness of the city, which I think is a significant gap, and therefore I'm really pleased to see that.
Thank you, Councillor Sarah. I totally agree with you. I think that the description of the architect, how the building is suffering so much from water ingress at the moment. These are key buildings in the city centre, actually, and having such empty buildings isn't good for us, for our economy or for the vitality of the city centre. Councillor Udall?
I didn't expect to be called so quickly. It's like winning the lottery. Condition number 11, which I've just been reading through, mentions all the restrictions which we would normally put in place for any kind of development, especially about hours of operation and when demolition works will take place. I just wonder if we can be a bit more firmer, put some, I hate to use this terminology, meat on the bones here, because clearly there are times when it would be inappropriate for activity to take place, and I would like to be assured that they wouldn't. For instance, peak time on a Saturday. When the area is predominantly a shopping area, and even nighttime working, which may be required at some times, I would like to see that restricted, because the primary nature of the nighttime economy would make that difficult, and could have conflict with other businesses. I just wonder if the officers have got any early indication of the views and what kind of conditions they would like to see to make sure that the construction of this site does not interfere with any other business or residents in the area, because I'm aware some residents actually do live very close to this site as well.
Through you, Chair, I think you've highlighted all the aspects that officers would be looking at to make sure that it's safeguarded. So certainly we're on the same page as you are in terms of making sure that this is provided and constructed in a convenient way that is looking at a considerate build, and particularly as the City Council are flagshipping this would be something that we would pay particular attention to, but particularly in terms of the conditions. You're absolutely right, those are the aspects that we would consider.
And Councillor Udo, I expect you're also interested in condition 9, which is the delivery and servicing management plan for future hours of delivery and servicing. So that's obviously really key as well. So I'm really pleased to see that as one of the conditions. Do I have any other questions? Okay, has anybody got a proposal? Councillor Amos.
I want to propose that we accept the recommendation.
Blow me down. Do you know what, Councillor Amos? I thought with only one more committee after this that I might not get this opportunity.
Well, I was going to say,
this year.
take it while you've got it and have it recorded just in case.
I will. And Councillor Amos, that is with the amended conditions to 3 and 7 that were in the late paper? Yes. Okay, thank you. Do I have... Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Cross, would you like to? Oh, Councillor... Oh, so... Okay. Councillor Cross, would you like to second? And you're happy with the amended condition 3 and 7? Fine. Councillor Agar? Yes, please.
Rather than the question, I have the sensation going around this building, and I've been around it twice recently, that we were just in time, because that building is really suffering. And if we want to preserve what is an important locally listed building, I think, you know, we really need to get this sorted out and decided. And the interesting thing was, I was passing the market stalls today, and one of the ladies there wanted to know what we were all doing. And I said, we're the planning committee. We've got to make a decision about the Scala today. And she got all excited because she used to go there as a child to the cinema. And I thought, oh, that's lovely. There may be anecdotes we can gather, history we can gather that we haven't even thought of yet, because there must be lots of people around who remember the building fondly and who are getting excited and find this amazing that it's coming back into use. It was just rather touching.
I totally agree, Councillor Agar, and I think we should get, is it the officer Sheena Payne-Lunn, who does the oral history? I think as part of this, as City Councillor, we should get her on board, because I think having these stories come to life is part of it. There were particular places in the building where the flooring was different, and it kind of indicated a different historic use. And I think that's really got to translate to the future. Councillor Cross, final comment?
That sounds like a great idea for putting on the hoarding, site hoarding, and then ultimately a memory board inside, just the recollections, what it means for people as well. Ideas. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful plan. Okay, should we move to a vote then, please? Can I see hands in support? That's unanimous. Thank you very much, members. Do we have any other business? I don't think we do. No, you can all go home. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you.